In a faraway village, nestled between rolling hills and ancient forests, lived a girl named Zara. The village was a place untouched by time, where the river whispered secrets to the trees, and the winds carried tales of generations past. Life moved slowly there, in rhythm with the sun and the seasons, and the people believed in omens, blessings, and the invisible threads of fate that connected them all. But what happens when beauty becomes a curse? Stay tuned to Innocent Stories to find out. Zara was the kind of girl who turned heads without trying. Her beauty was not just in her face, though her eyes were like still water under moonlight, and her smile as warm as the early morning sun, but in her heart. She helped the old carry wood, fed stray animals when no one was looking, and sang to the birds as she swept her doorstep. Children followed her as if enchanted, and even the elders nodded in quiet approval when she passed. Her presence brought peace. But behind her radiant smile, a shadow was growing. Can you guess what darkness awaited her? Keep watching Innocent Stories to uncover the truth. Her mother, a gentle woman with a soft voice and steady hands, had passed away when Zara was still a child. For years, it had just been Zara and her father, a quiet, hard-working man who adored his daughter more than anything. But time, as it does, moved forward, and loneliness found its way into their home. Eventually, Zara's father remarried. The woman he chose was beautiful in the way still lakes are beautiful, calm on the surface, but hiding something cold and deep beneath. To the villagers, she seemed kind and composed. She smiled when spoken to, wore her shawl just right, and never raised her voice. But Zara, who lived under the same roof, soon learned that the stepmother's beauty was only skin deep. She was not cruel at first, only cold. There were no beatings, no yelling, just a quiet withholding of warmth, of comfort, of love. Zara's meals became smaller. Her clothes stopped being mended. Her father, often working long hours in the fields or traveling for trade, remained unaware. The stepmother would always greet him with a soft voice and kind words, masking the sharpness behind her eyes. What stirred the stepmother's heart with bitterness wasn't Zara's presence. It was her glow. Zara grew older, and her beauty bloomed like spring after a long winter. Young men came to the village square and found reasons to stay longer. Market vendors gave her the best fruit. Women whispered behind their palms, saying, "She looks just like her mother." And that name, her mother's name, was a knife to the stepmother's pride. She watched as Zara shone without effort, as people smiled at her without reason, and she felt herself fading into the background. The more Zara's beauty grew, the more invisible the stepmother felt. And from that invisibility bloomed something darker, jealousy, slow and poisonous, like the bite of a spider. She began to watch Zara with narrowed eyes. Every compliment Zara received was a thorn in her side. Every glance Zara didn't notice, the stepmother did. She convinced herself that Zara's beauty was a curse, not just upon her, but upon the entire household. In her twisted thoughts, the answer seemed clear. If Zara's beauty was the cause of her suffering, then that beauty must be taken away. And so, in the quiet corners of her mind, a cruel idea began to take root, one that would forever change all their lives. The change was gradual, like the slow wilting of a flower under harsh sun. At first, Zara thought she was imagining it, the way her stepmother would look at her just a moment too long, her smile too tight, her praise too faint. Then came the extra chores. Tasks that once were shared now fell solely on Zara's shoulders. She was made to sweep not just the house, but the courtyard, fetch water from the well, even during the hottest hours, and clean the utensils long after everyone else had gone to sleep. Her meals grew smaller. If there were 3 flatbreads, Zara got half. If there was fruit, she was told to save it for guests, though none came. The new clothes promised for the spring festival never came. Instead, she wore her old dress, stitched and restitched by her own hands. But Zara said nothing. Her patience was not born of weakness, but of grace. Her mother had once told her, even when the world turns cruel, let your heart stay kind. And so Zara held on to her gentleness like a candle in the wind. The villagers began to notice, not her suffering, for Zara never complained, but her strength. How she carried heavy jars of water with steady arms. How she smiled even when her hands were raw from scrubbing floors. How she sang quietly as she walked barefoot over stony paths. The old women praised her humility. the young men admired her quiet charm. One of them, a wealthy landowner's son from the neighboring region, happened to visit the village for a wedding. He saw Zara by the well, her sleeves rolled up, water droplets clinging to her arms like pearls. She was laughing with a child, completely unaware of how radiant she looked in the sunlight. Later that evening, he asked about her. The villagers, eager matchmakers, sang her praises, her kindness, her manners, her beauty. Within days, word reached Zara's father. A proposal was being prepared. The landowner's family was rich, respected, and known for treating their daughters-in-law with dignity. Zara's father, for the first time in a long while, smiled with hope. Perhaps his daughter's future was beginning to brighten. But that hope became a storm inside the stepmother's heart. The proposal was a mirror, one that showed her what she could never be. She remembered her own youth, when her beauty had drawn eyes, when her name had been whispered with admiration. But time had dulled her glow, and in Zara's light, her own shadow only grew longer. Now the same village that barely noticed her offered praise and proposals to the girl she had tried to keep small. She did not scream. She did not cry. Instead, she sat by the window in silence that night, watching the moonlight spill across the floor like spilled milk. Her thoughts twisted and turned, knotted like vines. She convinced herself that this was not just jealousy. This was justice. Zara had taken everything: attention, affection, admiration. It was time to take something back. She began to talk sweetly again, offering Zara tea, asking her to sit and rest. Zara, ever forgiving, welcomed the change, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. The stepmother began asking questions. Where did Zara keep her shawl, her comb, her mirror? She started watching her more closely, memorizing her habits, her paths, her moments of solitude. It was as if she were studying her, not as a mother would a daughter, but as a hunter watches prey. By the end of that week, the stepmother had made up her mind. Zara's beauty, the very thing that made her glow in the eyes of the world, was the root of all her misfortunes. She could not bear to live another day watching the girl she envied be celebrated while she herself faded into quiet bitterness. In her heart, a dark decision was made. Zara must lose her beauty, not through words, not through shame, but through something permanent, something that could never be undone. And once that idea took root, it grew quickly, wild and thorned, until there was no space for love or reason left inside her. Only the hunger to destroy what she could not become. The morning sun rose over the village like any other, golden and soft, casting a gentle glow over the rooftops and waking the world with its warmth. Birds chirped, the wind rustled through the trees, and the people stirred from their sleep to begin another ordinary day. But inside Zara's home, something far from ordinary was brewing, something dark and irreversible. Zara's father had left early that day, called to a nearby town for trade. He kissed his daughter on the forehead, promised to return in 2 days, and rode off, unaware that the peace of his home was about to be shattered. The stepmother stood at the doorway, waving gently, her face a mask of quiet devotion. But as soon as he disappeared down the road, her expression changed. Her lips tightened, her eyes grew colder. She closed the door slowly and turned to Zara with a false smile. "You've worked hard lately," she said softly. "Why don't you take a little rest this morning? I'll make tea." Zara, always eager for kindness, nodded gratefully. She went to the garden to breathe in the morning air, unaware of the stepmother's careful steps toward the kitchen hearth. Inside, the stepmother moved quickly. She placed a large brass pot over the flames and filled it with water. As it began to heat, she watched it intensely, as though willing it to boil faster. Steam rose in lazy spirals, curling in the air like silent snakes. The kitchen grew hotter. Her breath came quicker. The sound of the bubbling water was like a drumbeat in her chest, loud, wild, final. When the water began to roll in furious bubbles, she wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders and called out, "Zara, come inside, child. I've made something for you." Zara entered, her steps light, her heart open. She didn't notice the heavy pot in the stepmother's hands until it was too late. In a flash of motion, like a striking viper, the stepmother turned, her face twisted in something between rage and triumph, and hurled the boiling water toward Zara. The world split open with Zara's scream. The pain was immediate and searing, like fire licking her skin, melting away her beauty in seconds. The water struck her face and shoulder, scalding her flesh, blistering and peeling it in a moment of agony so intense it stole her breath. She fell to the floor, writhing, her cries echoing off the stone walls. The room smelled of smoke, steam, and something terrible, the sharp, metallic sting of burned skin. Neighbors heard the scream and came running. The stepmother, already preparing her mask of sorrow, met them at the door with tears and trembling hands. "It was an accident," she wailed. "She startled me. I didn't mean to. The water, it slipped." Zara could barely speak. Her voice, hoarse from screaming, could only form broken words. Her face was covered in cloth. Her once luminous skin now red, raw, and oozing. The villagers, unsure and shaken, took the stepmother at her word. She had always seemed so gentle. They pitied Zara, of course, but accidents happened, didn't they? Who could truly know what went on inside a home? The healer came and did what he could. Poultices were made, herbs were applied, and prayers were whispered. Days passed in fever, in pain, in silence. Zara's once beautiful face was now marked forever. The burns healed slowly, but the scars remained angry, twisted reminders of that moment. When Zara finally looked into a mirror again, she did not recognize the face staring back at her. The girl who had once been praised for her beauty was gone, replaced by someone unfamiliar, someone broken. But though the world would never see her the same way again, something deep inside her remained untouched, hidden beneath the pain, the bandages, and the betrayal, a quiet strength, a flicker of something fate had not finished with yet. Zara's days after the incident were cloaked in silence, broken only by the soft rustle of bandages being changed and the occasional hiss of pain that escaped her lips. The burns had left her swollen, her skin red and blistered, her eyes too tender to open fully. The village healer, kind but limited in skill, did what he could, applying salves, chanting old prayers, leaving her with herbs that soothed the ache but could not erase what had been done. The pain was constant. It pulsed through her like a second heartbeat, a cruel rhythm that made sleep shallow and waking worse. But it was the pain inside, the quiet shattering of something sacred, that truly hollowed her. She did not cry. The tears had dried up somewhere in the heat of the water and the heat of betrayal. Her stepmother, still playing the part of the grieving guardian, flitted around the house like a shadow, silent, careful. She no longer offered words, only looks, cold, satisfied, victorious. Zara stopped going outside. The garden that once brought her peace now felt like a stage, and she, a performer who had lost her mask. She covered her face with a cloth when she passed through the halls. She stopped visiting the market. The mirror in her room was turned to the wall. Even the sunlight, once her friend, now felt cruel. The villagers, once enchanted by her beauty, slowly turned their attention elsewhere. New gossip took root. New faces arrived. In the span of weeks, the girl they had once praised became a fading memory, a whisper of tragedy behind closed doors. Some still asked about her in passing, but fewer with each day. Even her father, though loving in his own way, grew quiet. He could not bear to look at her for long. Whether it was guilt, grief, or shame, Zara could not tell. He brought her food, asked about her healing, and then left quickly, awkwardly, as if her pain were contagious. The home became a house of ghosts, her mother's memory, her father's silence, and her stepmother's eyes watching from the corners. In that emptiness, Zara began to search for something no ointment could provide. She sat for long hours by the window, wrapped in a shawl, staring at the sky. She whispered prayers, not asking for her face to be restored, but for her heart to stop aching. She read old scriptures, her mother's faded notes in the margins, and let their quiet wisdom sink into her soul. She wept, not from pain, but from the loss of who she used to be. One evening, as the sky turned indigo and the wind carried the scent of rain, a stranger knocked at their door. He was old, bent with age, his beard long and white as river foam. His eyes, however, were sharp and alive, as if they seen far more than they ever spoke of. He introduced himself only as a traveler, a healer of the old ways, and asked to see Zara. The stepmother tried to turn him away, but Zara's father, perhaps out of guilt, allowed it. He entered Zara's room quietly and sat beside her with the stillness of someone who had sat beside many wounded souls. He did not ask to see her face. Instead, he simply said, "Child, you were not ruined, only remade." Zara said nothing. He placed a small mirror on the table but did not ask her to look. Instead, he leaned closer and whispered, "Real beauty can never be burned. It lives in the light you carry, not the skin you wear." Then, as quietly as he came, he left. That night, Zara did not turn the mirror around, but she did light a lamp beside it, and in the soft glow, she did not look away. She began to rise with the dawn again, not to greet others, but to greet herself. She tended the garden in the early hours when no one could see. She sang softly again, not for an audience, but for the wind. The world had taken her face, but not her flame. She would rebuild not what was lost, but what was waiting to be found. The rains came late that year. The crops withered in the fields. The river shrank into a dry, cracked path, and a strange stillness hung in the air like an omen. Then came the sickness. First just a fever in one house, then a cough in another. Within days, it swept through the village like wildfire. Children burned with fever. The elderly could not rise from their beds, and the once lively market turned into a street of shuttered doors in silence. Healers were overwhelmed. Some fled in fear, others fell themselves. Families waited helplessly, lighting candles and whispering prayers into the wind. Hope, like the river, had dried up. Zara heard the cries before she saw them. Her home stood slightly apart from the rest, and for a time, she was untouched. Perhaps the gods had remembered her pain and spared her. But she could not turn away. Despite her own scars, despite the ache that still lingered in her bones and in her soul, she stepped into the village with her face wrapped in a soft veil and her heart wide open. At first, people were too sick to notice. But as the days passed, a quiet awe spread through the houses. Zara was tending to the sick. She brought water, sat beside the dying, held the hands of those in pain. She whispered prayers into ears burning with fever. Her touch was gentle, her voice steady, her presence a balm in a world unraveling. It was the same Zara they had once praised for her beauty, now remembered for her mercy. She moved from house to house like a shadow of light, wrapped in her veil, her own pain buried beneath layers of purpose. Children clung to her hand. Mothers wept blessings over her. The same villagers who had once forgotten her name now spoke it with reverence. One morning, a group of travelers arrived at the village gate. Among them was a nobleman, a young prince whose sister lay gravely ill in a distant province. He had heard whispers in the markets of a girl with healing hands, a scarred angel who tended to the dying. He had dismissed them at first as village tales, but desperation has a way of humbling even the proud. He asked the village elders, and all pointed to the girl in the veil. When he found her, Zara was sitting beside a sick boy, wiping his forehead with a cool cloth. She looked up as the prince approached, not with nervousness, but with quiet curiosity. "I was told you can help the sick," he said. "I try," she replied simply. "I need someone to help my sister. She has a fever that no healer can break. Will you come?" Zara hesitated. Her heart had found fragile peace in this place of pain. But the boy stirred beside her and whispered, "Go. You're a light. Don't keep it hidden." So she went. They traveled together for 3 days. The prince, whose name was Idris, said little at first. He had expected a healer, perhaps an old woman with potions and chants, not this quiet girl who hid her face and carried a satchel of herbs with reverence. But as the journey stretched on, he began to notice her hands, scarred, yes, but steady. Her voice, soft but sure. Her silence, not emptiness, but depth. When they reached his home, Zara was taken to the sister at once. The girl burned with fever, her breath shallow and sharp. Zara sat with her for hours, crushing herbs, chanting quiet prayers, cooling her skin with cloth soaked in rosewater and mint. Night fell, morning came, and slowly, breath by breath, the fever broke. The prince watched this girl, her face still veiled, kneeling at his sister's bedside, her fingers bruised from mixing poultices, her clothes stained with medicine. He had seen many beautiful women in his time, queens, court ladies, dancers, but none had held his gaze the way this quiet, scarred girl did. On the 3rd day, when his sister finally smiled and took a full breath, Zara stepped out into the garden to rest. Idris followed. "You saved her," he said. "No," she answered. "I just helped her fight." He paused. "Why do you hide your face?" Zara touched her veil lightly. "Because the world once told me that beauty is the only thing that made me worthy. And when it was taken, I wasn't sure what was left." He stepped closer, his voice low. "What's left is something far greater." She_STM looked at him then, not with hope, but with steady honesty, and he saw what the villagers had begun to see: not a face, but a soul lit from within, a quiet flame unextinguished by fire or cruelty. And in that moment, he knew fate had not led him to a healer. It had led him to Zara. In the days that followed the princess's recovery, Zara remained in the palace as a guest, though she never quite saw herself that way. She still rose early, tending to the servants who had caught the same fever, still walked barefoot through the gardens at dawn, whispering soft prayers to the flowers. She moved with the same quiet grace she always had, veiled and humble, unaware of how her presence stirred the hearts of those around her. Prince Idris watched her from a distance at first, not wanting to startle the fragile connection between them. But with each passing day, his admiration deepened. He had known women with perfect faces, but never one with such calm, such gentleness, such fire. It wasn't just that she had healed his sister. It was the way she looked at the world, as if she had seen its worst and still chose to be kind. He began to seek her out, walking with her through the courtyard, asking about the herbs she used, the prayers she murmured when she thought no one listened. She spoke little, but when she did, her words stayed with him. "You don't speak of the past," he said once. "It does not need my voice," she replied. "It already echoes." And then one evening, under the soft light of the moon, Idris asked, not with pomp or royal command, but with quiet sincerity, "Would you stay?" "Not as a guest, not as a healer, but as someone who belongs." Zara looked at him, her veil fluttering in the breeze. She said nothing, but her eyes, dark and deep like earth after rain, answered everything. Word of her story began to spread, carried by merchants, servants, and travelers. They spoke of the scarred girl with the hands of a healer and the heart of gold, of the prince who saw past her veil, and of the light she carried that no flame could extinguish. The tale reached her village like a gust of wind through dry grass. At first, people whispered in disbelief, then in shame. The same Zara they had forgotten, hidden behind closed doors and half-truths, was now honored in a royal court. Questions began to rise. Memories surfaced, and truths that had long been buried clawed their way back to the light. The stepmother, once so composed and untouchable, now found eyes watching her differently. Children asked why Zara had disappeared. Elders recalled the day of the accident, the way she had screamed, the way the stepmother's story had never quite added up. A midwife who attended Zara came forward, her hands trembling, saying the burns were not consistent with a spill. They were deliberate. The lies unraveled like old thread. Bit by bit, her mask fell away. The village, once complicit in its silence, turned against her. The same people who had praised her manners now spoke of her malice. She was called before the village council, and though no punishment could undo what had been done, justice demanded its say. She was stripped of any honor, her place in the community taken from her. No one would work with her. No one would speak her name with respect. She was cast out, not with violence, but with something colder: rejection. When Zara heard the news, she was silent for a long time. The pain of the past echoed within her still, but it no longer controlled her. She had built something stronger than vengeance in her heart: peace. Idris watched her carefully. "Do you feel vindicated?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, just free." The royal court offered her more than a title. They offered her land, servants, jewels. But Zara accepted only a small garden by the palace, a space to grow herbs, a place to walk barefoot in the morning sun. She did not want gold. She wanted stillness. Letters arrived from her father, filled with regret and sorrow. He had believed the lies. He had looked away when she needed him most. He begged for her forgiveness. One day, she wrote back. "I forgive you," she penned simply. "Not for you, but for me." Time passed. The seasons shifted. Zara's scars remained, but they faded into stories rather than wounds. She chose not to hide her face anymore. When people stared, she smiled. When they asked, she told the truth, not with bitterness, but with calm. She married Idris under a tree blooming with white flowers. There were no golden thrones, no parades, just a quiet ceremony beneath the sky, surrounded by those who had come to know her not as the beautiful girl she once was, but as the luminous soul she had become. And in that moment, Zara stepped fully into her new beginning, not as a girl burned by cruelty, but as a woman shaped by grace. Years later, when Zara returned to her village, not out of need, but by choice, the people stood still. Children who had never seen her before stared in awe. Elders who once turned their heads in silence now bowed theirs in shame and reverence. She walked with calm steps through the same dusty paths, her veil no longer hiding her face, her scars no longer a secret. But Zara was no longer the girl they had once known. She was not the forgotten daughter, not the tragedy behind whispers. She was a woman carved by fire and made whole again by compassion, forgiveness, and truth. Her beauty had transformed. It was no longer in the smoothness of her skin, but in the light of her gaze, the gentleness of her voice, the strength of her silence. Some came to her with apologies, some with tears. She received them all with a quiet grace, as one might receive falling leaves, not with anger, but with acceptance. She had nothing to prove and nothing to reclaim. Her story had outgrown the village. Her heart had bloomed far beyond its borders. And when the wind passed through the fields that day, carrying whispers of what had been and what had become, it seemed to say what needed no explanation. Her stepmother poured boiling water on her face to ruin her beauty. But fate had other plans. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Innocent Stories for more tales of triumph and truth.